Okay, we can get started for those here and see who else joins, and we will also share the webinar widely through our channels. So thank you to everyone who has joined today to introduce the Retrofit Playbook by BPIE here at WRI in DC. We have Natalie Tamir.
That's Tim Gonsalves.
And Shannon Wilson.
So I will do a short intro of the agenda. We'll open with a welcome from the BEA team. Shannon Hilsey will present a brief overview of the work if you are not familiar. And then Mariangiola and Ivan will take over from BPIE to introduce their playbook on retrofits. And then we will open to Q&A. So yeah. Shannon, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm going to be really brief introducing the BEA this time because I think most folks on the line are already familiar. And if not, and you would like more information, and you're listening to this now or later, you can find more information at buildingefficiencyaccelerator.org. But just as a way of framing the playbook we're about to talk about, the BEA is a public-private partnership that's existed since 2014. That was when we partnered with our very first subnational jurisdictions. It is a network of over 50 organizations, companies, and associations dedicated to doubling the rate of energy efficiency worldwide, and more recently, a secondary goal of helping cities achieve zero carbon, all new buildings by 2030 and all existing buildings by 2050. So these are the targets that we understand the building sector needs to achieve to be in line with global climate goals. And all the organizations that are partners to the BEA are working to help cities reach those goals. Over the past 5 years, we have partnered with 53 subnational jurisdictions that you can see here on the screen. Those in purple are deep engagement locations where they have been receiving heightened technical assistance to test pathways, policies, and programs more intensively that other cities can learn from. And we also, starting with phase 2 in 2017, we're also partnered with 3 national ministries where we're leading national level engagements, trying to facilitate national, subnational interaction to create enabling policy for cities on building efficiency. Those national engagement locations are Mexico, Colombia, and India. You can see them in darker blue here on the screen. Next slide, please. Here's just a little bit of background as we just laid out. The central offer of the BEA of these organizations to the cities that partner with the BEA is technical assistance. We also work with cities on communications, on engagement. We provide resources and tools, case studies, and a little bit of funding in some cases, but primarily it's a technical assistance offer from our global expert organizations, including the Buildings Performance Institute Europe, who we'll hear from in a little while. As of last year, we're focusing this technical assistance on 3 topics that cities and partners identified as the highest priority for their work, and those include codes, retrofits, and targets. Obviously, this webinar focuses on the retrofits offer, although there's some crossover and overlap between all 3 key offers. Next slide, please. So here is just a quick overview on the screen of our technical assistance offer and playbooks in the context of that. So moving from sort of the most broad to the most focused, the playbooks are designed to be the go-to first step for cities moving forward in how they'll approach their building efficiency policy and pilot program actions. So these will be self-guided resources that lead cities through key steps and considerations for work on the 3 core offer topics that are on the right of the screen. Building on those playbooks, we will be offering and are already offering some peer learning and cohort learning for cities in groups that are working on areas related to those at the right. We're offering direct technical assistance on a small targeted basis and depending on city needs, and then also the deep engagement technical assistance that I outlined for selected cities. So if you'd like more information, please feel free to reach out to us or visit the website. In the meantime, we're going to hear from BPIE, who are leading our retrofits core offer.
Thank you very much. I will hand it over now to Mariangiola and Ivan.
Thank you very much. We are just regaining control of the of the screen. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mariangiola Fabbri, head of research at BPIE. You won't hear me talking long. I will just introduce BPIE to you for those who don't know us, and just explain a bit the framework of the work that we've done. So BPIE stands for Buildings Performance Institute Europe. We are based in Brussels. We are a not-for-profit think tank, and we really focus all of our work in supporting the implementation of buildings legislation in Europe, and collecting the lessons learned from this implementation and bring it back to policymakers, mostly at European level, so at European Parliament and European Commission, but also at member states level. We do support a number of municipalities and cities in developing their renovation strategies, and the material and the content of the Retrofit Playbook is based on both our experience really in assisting different municipalities in doing this, combined with the knowledge that we have of a set of existing legislation that is applied across Europe. As it was pointed out before, the focus of our regional focus for this work was South and Eastern Europe. So you will see and maybe hear some of the examples coming from this region, and so don't be surprised about that. And with that, I'll leave the floor to Ivan, who is presenting the structure of the Retrofit Playbook.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ivan Jankovic, and I work as a project manager in BPIE. Together with Mariangiola, I worked on the playbook, and actually I will be presenting, as Mariangiola said. So at the end, please feel free to ask any question. I think we will actually now use around 25-30 minutes to present the playbook, and we can start from simply presenting the structure. And even before this, we can actually just we should maybe say that this topic can be discussed over many hours, but actually here we have 30 minutes, and given that the playbook should be used as we said, as a first step for planning renovation of buildings, I think the idea is here is to actually to introduce you to the main idea of how it can be structured and what it should contain. So if we start from these four main topics included in the playbook, we can see that they go from assess to develop, implement, and learn and improve. To make it easier to understand, actually, the first part would describe why we should plan renovation of buildings, evaluation of the status quo, and what are the needs, so why and what we have to do. The second part then to develop, the strategy would actually explain how we should foresee reaching the goals that were set in the first part. Then the part implementation should actually explain who should do implementation, how to put strategy in practice, and what are the exact policies that would help us, or actually one city, to successfully implement the renovation strategy. The final part is actually about learning and improving, which means that every strategy cannot be perfectly done or perfectly implemented. So any feedback on what really happens in practice will be definitely useful for any future planning. And the point is that any strategy is not done once for the next 10, 20, or 30 years, but is regularly updated, and that is when learn and improve section is very important. So if we start with the first session, and the most important part, I would say, is actually analysis of different needs, and this can be provided by talking to different stakeholders, analyzing actually who stakeholders could be and what their interests could be as two most important points, which later actually we can combine and see what are the potential conflicts of different stakeholders and their interests, how to map all of them and to put them in one place to be sure not to forget a stakeholder, and then finally public consultations with stakeholders where we will exchange views. Actually, they will be allowed to exchange views, where actually local government actually can only benefit from this and understand maybe the needs that are not so clear in the first place. If we want to just clarify this a bit, we can mention some of the most important stakeholders. So if we take city as an example, we can always say that definitely public authorities are a stakeholder. Then, of course, building owners can be another group of stakeholders, utility companies, so suppliers of energy, gas, or electricity. Then definitely financial institutions, and for example, construction industry. These would be the most important stakeholders. And anyway, we should always keep in mind that stakeholders are or beneficiaries or suppliers, where actually public authorities, for example, can be both. We will see later how. If we consider interests of different stakeholders, it is usually clear, but it is something that should be elaborated on, because all the benefits and interests should not be concentrated only on energy. So energy saved should not be the only interest. Actually, local authorities should not assume that this is the only interest, because interests can come from increased value of, for example, buildings, then reduced public spending, for example, for health, or improved quality of work of public servants, for example. Then utility companies, their interests can be a bit different. As you can imagine, lower use of energy would mean lower revenues for them, and that would be actually one of the potential conflicts in stakeholders' interests. At the same time, budgets would suffer from lower taxes, for example, VAT, while definitely financial institutions would again have their interests in secure investments, which energy efficiency investments definitely are. When we talk about benefits, there are multiple benefits, but we can always remember that they can be split into direct and indirect benefits, where direct benefits are definitely linked to reduced energy used for heating, ventilation, air conditioning. And the main characteristic of these benefits is that they can be easily monetized and converted to reduced energy expenses. While indirect benefits are, there are many of them, and but the problem is that they are not easily quantified. However, for a proper planning and also execution, they should be quantified, and there are many different approaches how to quantify, for example, productivity benefits from improved indoor air quality or reduced health spending due to both improved comfort, both and indoor and outdoor air quality. And finally, for example, there is increased energy security that stays at the macroeconomic level, which is even maybe the most difficult one to quantify, but nevertheless, all the efforts should be used to quantify these benefits as well. Then if we move forward, actually we are going slowly to the development section, where the first step would be to describe the building stock of all the buildings that can be actually taken into account for renovation. We should always keep in mind what is the point of a renovation. Although it may be a trivial question here, is we should keep in mind that it is energy retrofit. And when somebody is describing building stock, they should keep in mind that focus is on energy performance, and all possible data that can be used to address energy performance as accurately as possible should be collected. Of course, this is a very difficult task. There are many sources of data, sometimes in collision one with the other, but what definitely should be part of the building stock database, it is data about architectural and structural properties of buildings, occupational patterns, and characteristics of the energy systems. Actually, this combined describes how much energy in a building is lost or actually gained during summer period, how the building is used, and what are actually the needs for indoor air, not only quality, but for indoor comfort. And finally, the characteristics of the energy systems would define not only which fuel mix is used, but also how much energy is lost within the system, and what are the possibility for improvements on this side. If we make it a bit more practical, definitely it is building age, size, then building use, thermal properties of the envelope, and types of energy systems. But these are all the things that actually somebody from the technical department of a local government should definitely be able to understand and to assess whether building database is well defined or not. As an example, we can actually mention state of building stock in Belgrade, in Serbia. The UN Environment Program actually supported recently Belgrade and public authorities to improve energy efficiency of buildings, where one of the main steps was to do the building stock, let's say, inventory, and to make a proper building stock of all buildings in Belgrade. And some of the results are that, as we can see, for example, 36% of buildings are connected to district heating system, which directly explains the supply of energy and also the use of both delivered and primary energy and possible carbon footprint of all these buildings. If we want to see in practice how it works, basically the building stock is something that would be defined in many different tables and a huge database, but some of the most important results and inputs for later analysis should look like this. It should be, we should be able to explain what is the, for example, total final energy, then how it is split into residential, at least residential, non-residential part, what is the share of district heating, what is the share of, for example, local heating through, for example, local boilers in different buildings. And finally, the energy, both final and primary energy consumed. If we continue, then we can see that after defining proper building stock, it is very important to understand what is the objective of renovation. This is very important because it is easy to say that buildings should be renovated, energy use should be reduced, but the main point here is how to do it, how to effectively use all the, for example, available financial sources that can exist, how to add value to all different stakeholders, not to some of them. And the main objective which should be followed in order to make a proper strategy is that buildings should be renovated in a cost-effective way. Exactly what this means, we will see later. There is a section called cost effectiveness. We could now just mention that cost-effective renovation can be seen from different sides and from different perspectives. Usually what people take into account is a perspective of a building owner, but it should not be the only one. So the main point is that the analysis and cost-effective approach should go from individual perspective to global perspective, taking into account wide benefits, performing economic analysis, and implying actually value added to the society as a whole. We will go back, as I said, to cost effectiveness later to explain it a bit more. Now we can say just about the approach to renovation. Actually, approaches can be broadly split into those energy efficiency measures that can be applied per building category, or they can be defined per fuel mix, or they can actually be active or passive measures. So to make things simple, we can start with some retrofit measures that can be applied actually to each building category. So one of the main features of the building stock should be split of total building stock to different building categories, and what is important is to have residential and commercial buildings split at least. So just quickly, we can say that retrofit measures for each building category can be split into measures that can be applied to envelope, to building envelope, to building system, or to lighting systems. If we go to retrofit measures that should take into account renewable energy sources, usually they are all linked to how to use solar energy. They can be passive or used solar energy to produce hot water or generate electricity, or one of the most very important measure from the renewable energy sources is linked to heat pumps that can actually use heat either from air or from geothermal heat sources. Just briefly about passive energy retrofit measures. They are mostly related to shading and natural ventilation or natural cooling that can be used when there are significant differences in outside temperature during the 24 hours. I think we'll have to speed up so we can maybe go quickly over some of the slides, benefits and costs. The important thing is that whatever is done, definitely a clear record of all the benefits and list of benefits and costs must be maintained, because actually this is an important input for later work, especially for cost-effective approach. We can say that some direct benefits and direct costs, such as energy saved and how much it costs to reach them, would be a job of engineer, while some wider costs and benefits should be probably addressed by an economist. And what is very important is to be able to combine these two expertises and the results from both sides. I think that we mentioned some of these before, actually, so we can maybe go to the cost-effective renovation and that concept. Concept of cost effectiveness is relatively, I would say, simple, maybe to explain, but to apply in practice, it can be something a bit different and more complicated. What is considered as a cost-effective renovation is definitely a renovation that would result in positive net present value. For example, we can use other financial parameters such as internal rate of return that should be above the cost of capital. But when these are applied in practice, we can ask ourselves, should we analyze measure by measure, or should we analyze packages? Then, for example, what are the buildings we should address when we have in front of us a whole building stock? So, for example, we can say that the cost minimum is rarely defined for a single package of measures, but what happens in practice is that a building stock will be, let's say, defined by reference buildings, probably not many, but 2, 3, 4, for example, for one segment, for example, for residential buildings, and then different packages of measures will be analyzed. Some of these measures may have positive, some of measures can have negative performance. What is important that financial performance of all these combinations is not, it is not very easy to calculate the financial performance. So there are different standards that explain this issue and can be used by local authorities when addressing this issue. However, the most important things to keep in mind are capex, running and disposal costs, different energy prices, discount rates, lifetime of materials that would define lifetime of the investment. And all of these would actually, at the end, provide a cost curve that would look like this, which defines a cost optimal reduction. So for one specific building, for a reference building, there should represent one group of the building stock, one segment of the building stock, we would be able to define cost optimal range that is slightly on the left and on the right of the point O, and that is where proposed packages of measures should be, and that is something that should be later promoted through different policies. In order to obtain this curve, it is not an easy job, and again, it should be devoted to proper team of experts with expertise from different fields. To go quickly to financing, regarding financing renovation, after knowing what are the benefits and what are the costs of a renovation and selecting what our package of measures should be, we can focus on financing. What is important in financing is that projects should be aggregated. The main reason for this is that mobilization of private investments cannot be avoided. It is very well known that public sources are not enough to push for renovation. Significant participation from private sector must be present, and that is why projects should be aggregated, because in that way it is easier to mobilize private investments. For example, just to explain what we're talking about, if government issues green bonds to finance energy efficiency, in order to attract private investments, before issuing bonds, the government should aggregate different buildings, or in this case, different building types, and specify that investments will be used for that specific type of buildings, and should be able to explain to potential investors into green bonds what, for example, rate of return on specific investment will be, so that investors can be assured about their return of capital. And that is where we see how aggregation of projects works and helps in attracting private capital. Important part of financing renovation is reducing the perceived risk, where it is well known that and understood that energy performance and improving the energy performance is a long-term investment that is not very risky, but it is not that everybody recognize its low risk nature and lower probability of default. And definitely significant effort in promoting this low risk should be done. Finally, okay, not finally, but very important part here is a policy appraisal. Policy appraisal, within policy appraisal, a local government should analyze existing policies and see if they work, and if not, why not, and to design new strategies that would support all those conclusions from previous steps, why an renovation is done and how it should be done, how much financing we need, and similar issues. When we talk about reviewing the existing policies, some of the most important areas to be covered are, as you can see, regulatory area, fiscal and financial, communication, capacity barriers, technical, and even research and development. We can just briefly say a bit about these. When we talk about regulatory environment, it is very important to identify building renovation trigger points, and to understand actually when building owners will be forced, unless they are willing to invest in energy efficiency by themselves, when they will be forced to perform energy renovation of their buildings. One of the biggest trigger points and the most important is major renovation of their buildings, which means that at that moment they are obliged to perform also energy efficiency retrofit, and they will not be given the construction permit unless they show that a certain level of energy efficiency retrofit will be achieved. Then if we talk about technical area, definitely what policies can do is to develop renovation standards. So for example, saying at the moment of major renovation, what each building element should fulfill in sense of, for example, U values or air changes per hour. That would be at the level of the building actually. Or if we talk again about the level of the building, it should be what technical rules can say is how much energy can be used after, what is the maximum allowed annual energy use of a building after the renovation. If we talk about fiscal and financial policies, what can be developed is different funding vehicles tailored to specific market segments. This in practice means that policy can promote financing scheme for low-income households, or for example, develop different mechanisms, including energy performance contracts. One of the latest, at least in EU, change is that public authorities were allowed to move their engagement in energy performance contracting to their off-balance sheets, which means that there are policies allowing local authorities to invest and not to actually and to maintain debt capacity as before, as prior to the investment. So investing without affecting their indebtedness. When we talk about communication, what policies can do is to promote and establish publicly accessible databases showing results of building renovation. If we talk about capacity building, policies definitely can push for licensing and continuous education of energy auditors, but also different construction, not different, but construction companies that would like to be involved in energy retrofit of buildings. Finally, when we design policy package within this implementation section, we should keep in mind that policies, when they're defined, should be concrete and with deadlines. So, for example, saying when something should be introduced, setting out roadmaps with targets. For example, if it is a long-term strategy, milestones for 2030, 40, 50 would be definitely useful, but there is something that will be updated every couple of years. Another important part is to identify existing financial sources and how they can be used for financing building energy renovation, and also identify new funding sources through policies. There are different examples of this, but maybe we can go later through this in a Q&A section if needed. The last part of implementation step is to draft and publish the strategy. The point here is that before the strategy is finalized, so let's say final draft should be shared, publicly shared. There should be potentially and ideally wide public discussion in order to raise awareness and support of the strategy, and ideally at least stakeholders who were present in the first step and who provided their views on what strategy should address and what are the needs. At least these stakeholders should be involved so that they can actually check how the strategy addressed their needs and provide feedback. The last part of the strategy could be a section that explains how learning and improving will be done once the strategy is implemented. As we said, there is no such thing as a perfectly designed and implemented strategy. So whatever is there on the paper, when it is implemented and converted to practice, there will be different results and the differences from what we actually targeted. And all of these could be collected, analyzed, and they could provide significant knowledge for any future update of strategy. As the most important, we can definitely note down the energy consumption, capex. We can forecast capital expenditure, but in practice it can be a bit different and can be significantly different from what we anticipated. And on the other side, what is important is to note down the results and to monitor results, not only physical amount of energy saved, but also monetary savings and reduced energy expenses, but at the same time, hopefully increased comfort, satisfaction of building users, and many different practical problems that can be spotted. Finally, one of the important parts of the strategy is to explain how positive results should be demonstrated. One of the important ideas throughout the strategy, but also here, is that even when, for example, financing is available, and even when local or even central governments are keen and ready to invest in renovation of buildings, still it can easily happen that building owners are not interested. And that is why awareness raising is extremely important, and that is why any success in reducing energy use should be explained and shared. And of course, interesting point, if we talk about cities, interesting point here, maybe renovation of those community landmarks such as town halls, theaters, schools, and similar buildings. Yeah, this is the last slide. So we would make a break here and go to Q&A if there is nothing somebody else would like to add.
Thank you, Ivan, for walking us through this very important, yet a bit quite complicated process, but having it broken out step by step really makes it feel like something that's about a lot more tangible. So I am wondering if we have any questions from our attendees who are from many different geographic areas and city sizes. So wondering if there are any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box and I will communicate them to Ivan.
Actually, if I may, it's Mariangiola in Brussels. It would be useful for us to have a sense of how many of the participants feel that at least the first step, assess, and to me, I'm now referring to two main points. It's knowing what are the stakeholders to involve, and the second point is knowing where to look for the information and how to support to get the information about the building stock. How many of you know what is the situation in your respective countries or cities, and what do you think what is outlined here as first few steps? It's already maybe too challenging, or is something that you clearly know how to do and you've done in the past, so that would be the easy part of this process? It's just to give us an idea of what is the situation in your respective cities.
I wonder particularly, this is Debbie, particularly in the experience, for instance, in Mexico City. I see we have WRI and Sume on the line. If there's any feedback, this has been a challenge, I know there. Do you have any thoughts on that question? for Fairuz or Laura. I know that there's been ongoing efforts on building retrofits in Mexico City with work through the BPIE and with C40 and others. Is there anything that you'd want to mention with regards to the challenges or the challenges that you've faced or the sort of ability to collect this kind of data in Mexico City?
Yeah, hi, Laura from SUME here in Mexico. One challenge that, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. One challenge that we have nowadays in Campeche, in the state of Campeche, where we are starting the pilot project, is because the building that has been selected is a public building that is an iconic building. Is a very good thing because is the way that the state wants to lead by the example, but it's a high historic building. And we are facing that we have two parts together. The first one is that is the most iconic building, but as it is an historic building, maybe some of the measures when we modeling this, maybe could some of these could not be do because it's an historic building, and maybe we want to need to have some permissions, additional permission, or maybe it's not going to be possible. It's one of the challenges that we have, and that this is what was going to be my question: how the institute faced this challenge, and how this challenge was faced in the Mexico City historical building in the town.
When we talk about a building stock, still these buildings will make really a small part, and what we described here in the building stock database section, I can say would not really reflect buildings very well, because if you want to renovate those buildings, they have to be addressed case by case, exactly because of those features that you mentioned. And I think that nobody needs a database of those buildings unless there are so many of them, but still so that you can easily classify them and somehow group them, group similar historical buildings. But given that they have to follow the architecture of a specific street or a neighborhood, I think it would be very difficult. So this section was more about buildings that do not have a special requirement, and how to deal with these buildings. I guess that they should let's say form a special part of strategy where, if possible, all the problems addressed, all the problems linked to these buildings will be specified. But maybe this will be mostly related to different maybe policies or financing, but technical issues maybe not, because I don't think that there should be a specific package of measures that can be applied to historical buildings. I don't know if I answered. I mean, addressing this issue would definitely require a bit more of engagement from engineers, architects, urban planners. That would definitely be part of the team. But let's say when they are engaged in making and designing a building stock, they would need certain part of their expertise, while addressing historical buildings case by case, they would need a bit of more a bit different expertise than simply what they would need for defining building stock database.
If I can add something, I think, you know, what Ivan just said, I think it is important, however, to identify these buildings and to really have a sort of an inventory of how many they are, where are they located, and collect as much information as possible about their own characteristics, and really create a separate category in a renovation strategy for them. And then maybe usually what we see here in Europe is that out of this list, there are one or two iconic buildings that are taken out and renovated, and but as Ivan said, almost on a case-by-case basis. So the process of maybe getting the right knowledge together, so in a way of the stakeholders to understand, you know, what are the main issues, what are the most important elements to be preserved in a historic building, still need to be developed and to be done. So some of these steps are relevant also for these buildings, but the measures as such are going to be very specific. And I know that there are a lot of research projects that are developed here in Europe, really trying also to look at ways to deal with historical buildings in a more systematic way, but it's really, really challenging. So I would say that the most important thing is, first of all, identify them, put them in a category, and also characterize them as much as possible in terms of not only their architectural features, but what are the needs for these buildings. Hello?
Hello? Yes, thank you. It was very clear and useful. Thank you.
Great. We're at time. I wonder if people have a few minutes of flexibility we have one more question, if we might have if possible, a quick response on it. But if anyone has any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to myself and I will put you in touch with the BPIE team. I think my email is on the invitation as well, or perhaps Debbie Wiles is. But the one follow-up question is from the state of Yucatan, and they say they have a database of public buildings but struggle to constantly keep it upgraded and improved so that the data is still relevant. And I'm wondering if Ivan and Mariangiola, if you have a recommendation for that situation.
I would have a question first, which is it clear who has ownership of this database and who introduced those data at the very beginning? And would they be the same, ideally the same people that would be able to update those data, or is it something that can be done automatically every time there's a renovation of a public building? Let's say that once it is done, the either the authority or the construction company that was in charge of that renovation could be in a way mandated to update the information, but that is only possible if that database is online, or if there are easy ways of sending that information, and if on the other end, if it's not online and it has to be done manually, if on the other end there is someone that is appointed to do that, because that's what we've seen very often. Databases are created, but the moment a contract ends or a project ends, if there is not someone that has been appointed to collect the new data and upload them, unless it can be done almost automatically and in a digital way, it is very difficult to happen.
Yeah, if I can add, yes, I agree completely. And actually this would mean that a database should be let's say properly defined and designed and managed, and then it will be much easier to update it from time to time, even if one project dealing with collection of data ends and another project starts. If the database and has a proper structure, it will be much easier then to continue with populating with data, and many other problems will be actually resolved. So maybe this would be, I would say, there's one of the most important starting points.
Thank you both for that. I will put you in touch with Mirel offline so that she might be able to follow up with you and continue this discussion, since we are currently out of time.
Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you all for joining. Thank you especially to Ivan and Mariangiola for leading this. Really interesting and really valuable to have this recorded also for that we will post onto the BEA site. So yes, please feel free to follow up with any questions, and thank you again for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks to all. Bye-bye.